It was a Saturday night in October 1978. A young pilot named Frederick Valentich was flying a small plane over the Bass Strait in Australia. He was 20 years old. He was flying from Moorabbin, near Melbourne, to King Island, a small island halfway to Tasmania. It was a routine flight. The weather was clear. Visibility was good. He was flying a Cessna 182L, a reliable single-engine plane. He had about 150 total hours of flying time. He wasn't a veteran, but he wasn't a complete novice either. He was about halfway through his journey, flying over the water as the sun went down. At 7:06 p.m., he radioed Melbourne's air traffic control. He wanted to know if there was any other known traffic in his area, specifically below 5,000 feet. The controller, Steve Roby, replied. He said no. There was no known traffic. Valentich then said something that would start one of the most baffling mysteries in aviation history. He said he could see what looked like a large aircraft. It was near him. It had 4 bright lights. He told Roby it had passed over him, maybe 1,000 feet above. The speed was something he couldn't identify. It was moving fast. Then he said it was approaching him from the east. Roby again confirmed there were no military or civilian aircraft in the area. Valentich was alone out there, or he was supposed to be. The conversation continued. It grew stranger. Valentich described the object in more detail. He said it seemed to be playing a game with him, orbiting above him. He said it had a green light, and its exterior was metallic and shiny. It was long, but not like a traditional aircraft. He tried to get a better look, circling his own plane. He told air traffic control that the object was now hovering over him. Then he reported that his engine was starting to run rough. It was faltering. This is the part of the story where a simple problem becomes a true mystery. A pilot seeing strange lights could be a mistake. Venus is often mistaken for a UFO. So are other planets or even distant fishing boats, but engine trouble at the exact moment, an unidentified object is hovering overhead? That's different. That's specific. Valentich's final transmission was not a scream of panic. It was a statement of confusion and fact. He said, "Melbourne, that strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again. It is hovering and it's not an aircraft." There was a pause. Then, for 17 seconds, the microphone was keyed open. Air traffic control heard a noise. It was described later as a harsh, metallic scraping sound. A series of them. Then, abrupt silence. Steve Roby tried to call him back. Delta Sierra Juliet, Melbourne. Nothing. He tried again. Silence. Frederick Valentich, his Cessna, and the strange object he was describing were gone. An immediate search and rescue operation was launched. Aircraft and ships scoured the Bass Strait for days. They searched a huge area hoping to find a life raft, a piece of wreckage, an oil slick, anything. They found nothing. A few days later, an oil slick was spotted in the area where they thought he might have gone down. But samples showed it wasn't aviation fuel. It was just a random slick in the ocean. The plane had vanished without a trace. No wreckage was ever found. No body was ever recovered. So, what happened to Frederick Valentich? Did aliens abduct him? That's the question that has hung in the air for over 40 years. It's the theory that grabs the imagination. It's a clean, simple, and terrifying explanation for a situation that makes no sense. A young pilot, a clear night, a strange object, and then, no, nothing. It sounds like the opening scene of a science fiction movie. The UFO community latched onto the story immediately. It had everything. A credible witness, a pilot. A direct audio recording of the encounter, eyewitnesses on the ground, and a complete disappearance. Let's look at that. Eyewitnesses. After the story hit the news, people started coming forward. A plumber named Roy Manifold was on the coast near Cape Otway, the same area Valentich was flying over. He was taking pictures of the sunset over the water. He didn't see anything unusual at the time. But when he developed his film, one photo had a strange smudge in the sky. He thought it was a flaw in the film. Later, when he heard about Valentich, he took a closer look. The photo showed a dark, fast-moving object coming out of the water. It looked like a dense blob, moving at high speed, kicking up spray. Was this the object? Or was it just a random shape on a piece of film? Experts have looked at it for years. Some say it's compelling. Others say it's inconclusive, likely just a weirdly shaped cloud or a developing error. Other people on the ground also reported seeing strange lights that night. A number of reports came in from the Cape Otway area, all describing an erratically moving green light in the sky around the same time Valentich disappeared. Were they all seeing the same thing? Were they seeing what he was seeing? It's hard to say. Eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable. People see what they want to see, especially after a big news story breaks. But the sheer number of reports from different people in the same area at the same time is hard to just dismiss. The abduction theory rests on the idea that Valentich's own words are the most accurate account of what happened. He described an object that was not an aircraft. He said it was metallic. He said it hovered. Conventional aircraft don't hover, except for helicopters, and there were none in the area. The object he described moved in ways that planes don't, and most importantly, he claimed it was directly affecting his plane, causing engine trouble. Then came the metallic scraping sounds. To believers, this is the sound of the craft being captured, pulled into a larger ship. It's the final piece of evidence before the silence. In this version of events, Frederick Valentich was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he became a victim of an extraterrestrial encounter. He was taken, and his plane was taken with him. It's a powerful story. It's also completely unprovable. There's no physical evidence, no alien technology left behind, no wreckage with strange markings. There's a story recording and a few blurry photos and scattered witness accounts. It requires a leap of faith. You have to believe that not only do aliens exist, but they visit Earth, they abduct people, and they chose this specific pilot on this specific night. For every person who believes in the abduction theory, there's someone else who believes in a much more down-to-earth explanation. The most common skeptical theory is pilot disorientation. This is a very real and very dangerous phenomenon. When you're flying at night, especially over a flat, featureless surface like the ocean, your senses can betray you. There's no horizon. The sky and the water can blend into one black canvas. A pilot can lose their sense of up and down. They can think they're flying straight and level when they're actually in a slow descending turn, a graveyard spiral. Could this have happened to Valentich? He was a relatively inexperienced pilot. He only had a few hours of night flying experience over water. It was the perfect setup for spatial disorientation. Skeptics suggest that the 4 bright lights he saw were his own landing lights, reflected off the surface of the calm water below him. As he began to bank and turn trying to identify these lights, he could have entered a spiral. The lights would appear to be orbiting him because he was the one who was turning. His plane, a Cessna 182, has its lights on the wings and nose. In a turn, those lights would move, and the reflection would move with them. He was, in effect, chasing his own reflection. This theory also tries to explain the other parts of his report. The metallic look of the craft could have been the glint of his own plane in the moonlight, reflected off the water, or even the curved canopy of his own cockpit. The engine trouble. In a steep spiral dive, the fuel flow in a gravity-fed engine like the Cessna's can be interrupted. The engine would cough and sputter, exactly as he described. The final metallic scraping sounds? Skeptics argued this could have been anything. It could have been the sound of his headset breaking up as the plane entered its final dive. It could have been the sound of the aircraft's structure groaning under the stress of a high-speed descent it wasn't built for. Or it could be the final, terrible sound of the plane hitting the water. This explanation is logical. It's based on known physics and common aviation dangers. It doesn't require us to believe in aliens. It just requires us to believe that a young pilot made a fatal mistake. But it doesn't fit perfectly either. Would a pilot, even an inexperienced one, be fooled by his own reflection for 6 full minutes? The transcript of his conversation with air traffic control lasts a long time. He sounds calm and curious at first, not panicked and disoriented. He describes the object's movements with a degree of clarity. He says it passed over him. A reflection couldn't do that. He says it was hovering. His reflection would only appear to hover if he was perfectly still, which he wasn't. And then there's the question of his character. Was he the kind of person prone to fantasy? This is where the story gets more complicated. His father, Guido Valentich, later told reporters that his son had a deep interest in UFOs. He had collected articles and books on the subject. He had apparently seen a UFO before and had been worried about being attacked by them. This information cuts both ways. To a skeptic, this is a smoking gun. It suggests that Valentich had a preconceived notion. He was already looking for UFOs. On a dark night, over the ocean, he saw some confusing lights, maybe planets, maybe his own reflection, and his imagination filled in the rest. He wasn't lying. He genuinely believed he was seeing a UFO because he was predisposed to that belief. But to a believer, his interest in UFOs makes him a better witness, not a worse one. He knew what to look for, he had researched the topic, he wasn't just some random person seeing a light in the sky. He was an observer who understood the context of what he might be seeing. His interest doesn't automatically discredit his experience. You could say a meteorologist is more likely to correctly identify a strange cloud formation, not less. Another point against the disorientation theory is the astronomical data from that night. The bright lights of Venus, Mars, and Jupiter were all visible in the sky. Could he have been looking at a planet? It's possible. Venus is incredibly bright and is the most common object reported as a UFO. But Valentich was a pilot. He had a basic understanding of navigation and astronomy. He described the object as moving, orbiting him, and approaching him. Planets don't do that. and he explicitly said it's not an aircraft. He would surely know it wasn't a star or a planet. So, if it wasn't aliens and it wasn't disorientation, what else could it be? There's a third, more cynical theory that Frederick Valentich faked his own death. This theory suggests that he planned the whole thing. He created a dramatic story over the radio to cover his tracks, and then flew his plane to a predetermined location, landed it on a hidden airstrip or ditched it carefully at sea, and was picked up by an accomplice. He wanted to disappear and start a new life. What's the evidence for this? Very little. It's mostly speculation. There was no clear motive. He didn't have massive debts. He wasn't in trouble with the law. He seemed to have a good relationship with his family. It would also be an incredibly difficult plan to pull off. The Bass Strait is a dangerous stretch of water. Landing a small plane in a remote, hidden location without anyone knowing is the stuff of spy movies, not real life. And why create such an outlandish story? If you want to disappear, you just disappear. You don't create a UFO incident that guarantees a massive search and intense media scrutiny for decades. It seems like the most complicated and least effective way to vanish. Still, it's a possibility that has to be considered, however remote. Then, there is the simplest explanation of all. He just crashed. It was a simple case of engine failure or pilot error, and the UFO story was a product of a stressed mind in its final moments. Maybe he was having engine trouble from the beginning. Maybe in the dark and the panic he saw lights from a squid boat or a distant town, and his mind, already primed by his interest in UFOs, constructed the narrative of an alien craft. His plane went down, and the rough seas of the Bass Strait swallowed the wreckage whole. This happens. Small planes disappear over the ocean all the time. The search for Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 showed us how a massive Boeing 777 can vanish in the ocean. A tiny Cessna would be infinitely harder to find. This is perhaps the most likely scenario. It's mundane, it's tragic, and it's boring, but it's probably the closest to the truth. Humans are storytelling animals. We look for patterns and meaning, even in chaos. A young man dying in a random accident is just a tragedy. A young man being abducted by aliens is a legend. Our minds are drawn to the legend. But even this simple theory has holes. Why did he sound so calm for most of the transmission? Why the detailed description of the object's movements? And what about those 17 seconds of metallic scraping sounds? It's a very specific, very strange detail. It doesn't sound like a typical crash. The Australian Department of Transport conducted an official investigation. The final report was inconclusive. They considered the main possibilities. They couldn't find a definitive answer. The official summary states, the reason for the disappearance of the aircraft has not been determined. They noted that it was presumed fatal for Valentich. The final, chilling line of the report suggests that the incident may be explained by the possibility that Valentich became disoriented and saw his own lights, but it also says that it's impossible to be certain, given the unusual aspects of the case, such as the final sounds heard on the tape. The government, in other words, officially shrugged its shoulders. They couldn't prove he crashed. They couldn't prove he was disoriented. They certainly couldn't prove he was abducted by aliens. They just knew he was gone. Let's go back to the man himself. Frederick Valentich was not a top-tier pilot. He had applied to join the Royal Australian Air Force twice and was rejected both times due to inadequate educational qualifications. He was a member of the Air Training Corps, but he wasn't considered a great student. His flying record was mixed. He had failed some of his examinations on the first try. He had a few minor incidents on his record, like flying into a controlled zone by mistake. The aTechnical report on his disappearance even classified him as having a flying history that included a number of incidents. Does this paint a picture of a pilot who was more likely to get into trouble? Maybe. It might strengthen the case for pilot error or disorientation. His father never believed his son crashed. He was convinced that Frederick had been taken by a UFO. He spent years looking for answers, speaking to anyone who would listen, holding on to the hope that his son was still alive somewhere. He pointed to his son's last words. It's not an aircraft. To Guido Valentich, that was the truth. His son knew what an aircraft was. He was a pilot. If he said it wasn't an aircraft, he meant it. So, where does that leave us? We have a collection of facts that don't quite fit together. Fact A, pilot disappeared. Fact, he was in radio contact, describing a strange object just before he vanished. Fact, his last audible communication was a series of metallic scraping sounds. Fact, no trace of him or his plane was ever found. And we have a collection of theories, none of which is a perfect. The alien abduction theory. It fits the narrative Valentich provided, but it requires belief in the extraordinary and has no physical evidence. The pilot disorientation theory. It's scientifically plausible and explains many elements, but it struggles to account for the duration of the event and some of Valentich's specific descriptions. Why would he say it passed over him? Why 6 minutes of confusion? The hoax theory. It's possible, but highly improbable and lacks any motive or supporting evidence. The simple crash theory. It's the most likely in terms of probability, but it feels incomplete. It doesn't fully explain the strange radio transmission or the final sounds. The mystery of Frederick Valentich endures because it lives in the gap between the known and the unknown. It's a perfect story because it has no ending. Any answer you choose says more about you than it does about what actually happened that night. If you're a romantic, a dreamer, or someone who believes we're not alone in the universe, then you see a clear case of alien abduction. You hear the transcript and you get chills. You see the story of a young man who crossed a boundary and saw something he wasn't supposed to see. If you're a pragmatist, a skeptic, a person who trusts science and logic above all else, then you see a tragic accident. You see a case study in human fallibility. You hear the story of an inexperienced pilot who got confused in the dark, panicked, and paid the ultimate price for his mistake. His UFO story was a delusion, a final, confused narrative his brain created as it lost control. And the truth is, we will almost certainly never know. The Bass Strait holds its secrets well. The plane is likely sitting at the bottom of the ocean, corroded and covered by sand, its secrets lost forever. The only evidence we have is a ghost on a radio wave, a voice from 1978 describing something impossible, followed by a strange noise and an endless silence. Did aliens abduct Frederick Valentich? I don't know. Nobody does. But the story he told in the last minutes of his life was powerful enough to create a mystery that has lasted for decades. He reported seeing something. He was clear about it. It's not an aircraft. Whatever he saw, whether it was real or a phantom of his own mind, it was the last thing he ever saw. And his final, desperate attempt to describe it is all we have left. The story isn't really about aliens. It's about the unknown. It's about that moment when the world stops making sense, right before it disappears completely. And that's a much more frightening and fascinating story than any simple answer could ever be.